Howdy, y'all. Dr. John back again. And I'm really pleased. You keep sending me great questions. And even if you have a question during the show, go ahead and share it with us. And let's see what we can do with it. Most of the time, I just talk off the top. Occasionally, I might put something together like a PowerPoint or even do a little research. And today I actually looked at a website. I got a question this morning to get some numbers for you because I thought it was a really great question. Now, the first question, and this one will be fairly quick, I think, is I was told by a chiropractor who practiced kinesiology and homeopathic healing that I had rickettsia in my body back in 2006. Does that ever go away? I'm wondering, after listening to your Q&A on Lyme disease, if that is underlying what is causing a lot of my symptoms. Okay, good question. By kinesiology, I'm thinking it was applied kinesiology, which is a methodology for testing different substances that are placed in your energy field and to see how and there's actually very scientific reasons why that works. It looks like voodoo for sure. And there has not been a lot of evidence in studies showing that it works, but there is some, particularly for the Omura O-ring technique. And so it's based on how the sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous system responds to certain energetic, I'm going to call them resonances. Sometimes they're intrusions. Sometimes it's a resonance that's beneficial. But through certain types of kinesiology, there's a particular one that I like the best, which is called autonomic response testing. It seems very accurate, but still, I will, if I find something that can be tested for, but with a Western medical test, I will follow up with a Western medical test, or I'll do the Western medical test first, and then do one of the other energetic systems. I'm always taking pulses and comparing that, but we might do some autonomic response testing to check that out. And that's mostly Catherine's bailiwick. So I'm assuming that's what this was. Now, there are some forms of applied kinesiology that I think are accurate and some that I don't trust at all. So I have no idea what we're dealing with here. So I'll just deal more with the rickettsia. Rickettsia is a bacterial disease. Lyme disease is a bacterial disease, but they're actually quite different in how they manifest and in how to, not so much how to eradicate them. That's actually rather similar, but also lifestyle. Rickettsia, like all of the tick-borne illnesses, or most of the tick-borne illnesses, particularly those that are called co-infections of Lyme, there are huge debates, huge disagreements about almost all aspects of those bugs. Now, Lyme, we know, can persist for a lifetime. You can isolate it from tissues. You can stain for it for neurological Lyme, where you can actually see the Lyme spirochetes that have penetrated into the linings of the nerves. So there's no doubt that it's still there. Antibody testing is not very accurate because once you've been infected, you'll tend to show antibodies for many years and sometimes for a lifetime. But we do know, in my opinion, with certainty that Lyme can persist. It can develop into a chronic stage where it can be very difficult to detect and then get active again. That's one of the bigger deals that's happened with COVID. A lot of people that are thinking that they have, quote, long COVID, end quote, are really suffering from reactivations of illnesses that they had before COVID. For example, Lyme disease, very common. People that thought they had cleared their Lyme disease years ago, they were feeling great. They get COVID, their immune system plummets, and suddenly the problem is back as strong or sometimes stronger than ever. We find the same thing with Epstein-Barr virus, with the entire herpes family of viruses, et cetera, that we can get reactivations that are quite severe. Now, rickettsia I find less evidence for it persisting long term, partially because the illnesses that it tends to cause, there are several, but the ones in the US we think about are more typhus and there are two different types of typhus, by the way. So this is not typhoid. This is typhus and Rocky Mountain spotted fever. But with Rocky Mountain spotted fever, which is the more common, if it's untreated, people generally die in a relatively short period of time, and we're talking weeks, or get very, very sick. So my belief is, and again, the information and the studies are all over the map, is that Rickettsia either gets you or you get it fairly early. The immunoglobulins to test for it will show up within 2 weeks of infection and are generally completely out of the body within a year. So I think it would be very safe to test for Rickettsia, although that, it's unlikely that your medical doctor will do that at this point, particularly based on, evidence from a chiropractor who was doing some techniques that the doctor may not be familiar with. So you probably have to pay out of pocket, and it would be a rather pricey test to do. So I think it's unlikely that it's Rickettsia hanging around, but it's possible. Now, what to me is more likely, if you were diagnosed with Rickettsia, generally the same vectors that carry and transmit Rickettsia also carry and transmit the other co-infections that go along with Lyme: Bartonella, Anaplasma, Babesia, right? Things like that, Ehrlichia. And so it could very well, and many of those do persist, and we know that they persist. We can test for them. And so if you tested positive for Rickettsia, it's not unlikely that you would have had an additional tick-borne illness. And I say tick-borne, we now know, and we've known for over a decade because of the work of the brilliant Lyda Matman, that there are at least 30 vectors for Lyme disease. Spiders can carry it. The spider-borne Lyme generally doesn't activate as quickly. Ticks have an enzyme in their saliva that breaks down the immune system in such a way, it numbs, so you don't feel it, but it also breaks down the blood in such a way that things penetrate very easily. Within a minute, the Lyme can spread through most of your body, get to the brain. If it's spider-borne, it can often lie dormant for years. And so people never or rarely remember the source of the bite or the source of the problem. Fleas can carry it. Anything that bites you can carry it in terms of an insect. I don't think tigers can, but any insect that bites you could carry any of those so-called tick-borne diseases. We know that several species of biting flies actually carry them also. So it would be a little pricey, but you could test for all of those. The tests have come down in price considerably, but they're still, it's still a hit in your wallet, and you're unlikely to find an MD that'll test you for it. Yeah, so that's about 400, which is horrible, but it's down from about 1,600 that the good testing was a few years ago, and this is more accurate. So you're kind of in a little bit of a rock and a hard spot, but what you could do is go back to another applied kinesiologist. I would recommend someone does ART, autonomic response testing, because that one I believe is very accurate. Find someone that does that and get tested again. That would be much less expensive. Okay, cool. Let's see what else we have here for questions. If you've been on safari to Africa, there's another form of Rickettsia that acts a little differently. But if you've been on safari, send me an email and we'll discuss it more. Here's a question from Erin, an old patient. Old as in I haven't seen her for a while. She's not old. Says, thanks for doing these Q&As. It's such great information you're sharing. My question is about inflammation. I know diet is key, as well as taking fish oil, ginger, and curcumin. but curious on the Chinese herbs you would use to treat inflammation, or if there's a formula that you would recommend. Okay, well, that is a lot. I could spend a whole bunch of time with that. I actually looked up some numbers for you, and I'm trying to find those. If you'll give me just a moment. There we go. Okay, a good source. So, Aaron, I found a site when I was looking for numbers. It's called C60 Purple Power. I know nothing about them other than they had some interesting information. And there's it's called 9 Herbs and Spices That Fight Inflammation. So I'll talk about some of those in a minute. I'm going to talk about my favorite ones first. And this was by Ryan, R-Y-A-N, Raman, R-A-M-A-N, and it's from January 2021. So let's talk a bit. So I think people are pretty clear that the biggest thing, as you mentioned, is diet when we come to inflammation. That you can do everything else right. If you eat an inflammatory diet, you're going to be inflamed. There's just no two ways. Now, the question is, what specific things cause you to be inflamed? There are general inflammatories, getting a higher ratio of omega-6 fatty acids to omega-3 fatty acids. And I'll talk about that in a minute. Eating sugar, eating a lot of white carbohydrates, right? So these things are all inflammatory. But each of us has specific things that we also have either allergies to or sensitivities to, which will create inflammation. So it's really great if we can figure out or test for what specific inflammatory foods will affect us that might not affect someone else. For example, for me, number one is beer. Number two is tomatoes. And so if I have beer, my gout goes through the roof. Gout is a form of inflammation. It's a form of heat in Chinese medicine. If I have tomatoes, it will flare up. So, I don't drink beer with tomato juice anymore. So again, knowing your specifics is what's really, really critical. In Chinese medicine, we talk a lot about heat. Heat is a number of different things, and so it can get a little confusing, but inflammation is in the heat category. So when you find heat-clearing herbs, there are many different types. There's damp heat, that's more infection. There's toxic heat, that's more deeper levels of infection. Deficient heat, that's more related to hormone imbalances. Heat in the blood, that's more related to autoimmune type problems. So there are many different types of heat. And one of the things with Chinese medicine that is really hard for people in the West, and particularly doctors, to get their head around is that different herbs affect different locations in the body, and they affect different organs in the body. And so that's why when you get a large Chinese herbal formula, or even a small formula, it can have hundreds of different actions that it's doing in the body, where Western medicines tend to have one action. They do X, right? They kill this bacteria. They lower this cytokine level, et cetera. Where the Chinese herbal formulas, because of the number of alkaloids in each herb and the number of herbs in each formula, can have a really broad method of action. So in Chinese medicine, then, it's important to know the type of heat, the type of inflammation, and it's important to know the location of the inflammation. And ideally, it's important to know something about you personally and your diagnosis so that we can come up with the correct things. But I'm going to mention first a few of my favorites. Most of these are in the damp heat category, at least the first few I'm going to talk about. And one of the best is berberine. It's for us, we get it from the plant huanglian, but there are many other sources for berberine. It's what gives the yellow color to a lot of herbal compounds. And huanglian classically was used to treat damp heat. So that's infections, inflammations in the body. And it was classically used to treat inflammation in what's called the middle jiao. So that would be the center of your body. The thorax of the body is divided into three parts: the upper, middle, and lower jiao. So the upper jiao is above the diaphragm. So that would be your lungs and your heart. The middle jiao is from your diaphragm down a ways. So that would be your liver, gallbladder, spleen, stomach, in the west, pancreas. And then the lower jiao, which would be such as your intestines, large intestine in particular, and your kidneys. So each of these affects a different location. Now, Huanglian, or its derivative, berberine, I'm guessing berberine is now one of the 3 most studied compounds on the planet, because it does so many different things. Naturopaths are using it. I'm seeing medical doctors that are using it. I think they use it incorrectly sometimes, but they're using it. And it's very, 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 very powerful. You can do anything from gargle with it for bacterial infections to eat it for gut imbalances and infections. I never travel without Huanglian. It's great for if you get traveler's diarrhea or intestinal problems. It's the #1 thing to do. So it's anti-infection, particularly bacteria, but it's also an anti-inflammatory. I love it. I love it. It's phenomenal. And I'm glad it's making a resurgence. Golden seal was my go-to when I was younger, but now it's hard to get true wildcrafted golden seal. And plus, it's really not environmentally good because it's very hard to grow. So I don't use as much golden seal. I use Huanglian, which is a very close relative. Then there's a related herb called Huangqin, Huangqin, and Huangqin is often used in a formula called Huanglian Jadu Tong, Huanglian Jiedutang. And that's 4 herbs that are put together that are a shotgun formula to treat infection and inflammation anywhere in the main part of the body. Actually, it's good for any part of the body. It just does slightly different things. Now, berberine is now the #1 go-to for treating diabetes and high blood sugars in the naturopathic world. So again, just a huge range of things that can do. Huangqin, or Scutellaria, often called scute, is a classic herb for clearing inflammation and infection from the lungs. With the COVID epidemic, a great many natural healers used high doses of Huangqin, Scutellaria, to clear inflammation from the lungs, much as a steroid would be used or some of the other compounds. And it can be further extracted to make Baikalin, Baiklin. And Baikalin is pretty magical for lung problems. Someone says, I have long COVID and my lungs are bothering me, Baikalin. Someone says, I've got RSV and I just can't clear the phlegm, Baikalin. It's kind of a no-brainer, actually. So you combine berberine, you combine Huanglian and Huangqin, and you pretty much can hit most of the body. There's another herb that often goes with that called Huangbai, Huangbai, and you get those guys together, and it's quite a combination. I've been using this for decades and decades to very good use. You can now buy Baikalin on the open market. It's really great. And then, of course, as you mentioned, curcumin. Curcumin being an extract from turmeric. And this is another area where we get a lot of disagreement. The thought was, amongst supplement makers in particular, that the active ingredient in turmeric was curcumin, and so they would extract it to get the highest ratio of curcumin possible. Well, some later studies have shown that whole turmeric may have much better effectiveness. And this isn't surprising. Whenever they try to find the one magic thing in an herb, they usually miss. right? Because it's the combination. It's the combination of alkaloids working together synergistically that create the benefits. For example, Wang Lian, I was mentioning, is a root. Most of the antibiotic herbs in Chinese medicine and many of the antivirals and most of the antifungals are roots. And it's obvious why. When you have a root in the dirt, it is constantly 24 hours a day, 7 days a week for its entire life, being violently attacked by pests that want to eat it, right? You've got bacteria in the soil, you've got fungi, you have viruses that are all trying to eat your roots, right? And so they have to, if they're going to exist, have antifungal, antiviral, and antibacterial qualities. There is no other possibility. Otherwise, they wouldn't exist. So when you start isolating too much, sometimes it's a mistake. Curcumin is probably a mistake. I prefer turmeric, and we find when we use turmeric versus high extraction curcumin, I believe we get better results. We get good results with either, but I really like the whole turmeric. And if you're willing to, it's not easy to do, but if you're willing to, what do you call, grate it off of the root, it's even better. It's fabulous. Okay. Fish oil, she mentioned, right? Yeah, fish oil. You know, there are things that I started recommending 40, 50 years ago. But to me, they're just such an obvious thing. Unfortunately, I often fail to mention them. And fish oil is one of those. The studies on fish oil go way back. Now we have studies coming out saying, oh, it doesn't have the heart protective effects we thought it had. Oh, it doesn't have these effects that we thought it had. But what we're certain of is it has very powerful anti-inflammatory effects because of the omega-3 fatty acids in it and some other things. So you've got high levels of DHA, docosahexaenoic acid, which is great for the brain. You've got high amounts of EPA, eicosapentaenoic acid, which is great for the heart. And both of them are good for blood vessels and, more importantly, for the actual cellular structure. Most cells have a membrane around them, right? And the membrane is what protects them and makes them an individual entity. And that membrane is made up largely of cholesterol and omega fatty acids. And so the ratio of those things determines how flexible or non-flexible that membrane is. Well, you want it to be not too flexible, but pretty flexible. And getting high levels of omega-3s will assist with that. Also, good quality fats of other types are really critical too. But one of the things that's been known for quite a while is that the ratio of omega-3 to omega-6 fatty acids is critical in the inflammatory process. We get many dozens of times too much omega-6 fatty acid in our standard American diet. Okay, seed oils, very high in omega-6s, and people got sold a bill of goods going after omega-6 fatty, dense seed oils. So it's one of the reasons why fish itself is so powerful, because cold water fish have to have high levels of omega-3. Omega-3, that's the omega number. And so you count in a certain number of hydrocarbon connections, and that is where it's flexible. That is where it's unsaturated. So an omega-3 fatty acid is unsaturated at the third position and every third position. That makes it very, very flexible. So omega-6 fatty acids, that happens at the sixth junction, which makes it much less flexible. And if you heat it, then it forms a really, really bad trans fat form that's not flexible at all. So you take an omega-6 fatty acid and you heat it, and now you've just created a substance that your body, it kills your body and you can't get rid of. So Fish oil, absolutely critical. Now, if you want to improve on fish oil, go for cod liver oil, because with cod liver oil, that you're then adding vitamin A and vitamin D, which are right at the top of your list of anti-inflammatory foods to take into your body. We are grossly deficient in both vitamin A and vitamin D in our culture. And vitamin A often gets very much overlooked. So this is one of the reasons I recommend fish versus chicken. A lot of people aren't doing red meat, but they'll eat a lot of chicken or fish. Well, that usually gets skewed toward chicken. Chicken's a little easier. It's a little easier to find when you're running around. But the chicken that we eat in the United States has a very high omega-6 fatty acid level. The high quality, non-farmed, cold water fish is a great source of omega-3 fatty acids. So I would much rather balance the scale toward the omega-3s and away from the omega-6s, so more fish, less chicken. It's also critical, if you're going to eat red meat, that it's grass-fed. If you get a cut of meat, of beef, from a cow that has been totally grass-fed and grass-finished, the omega-3 content, approaches the omega-3 content of salmon, right? If it's not grass-fed, it won't have omega-3 fatty acids because it didn't eat any omega-3 fatty acids, and it will be very dense in omega-6 fatty acids, which, don't worry about the chemistry here, converts to something called arachidonic acid. Arachidonic acid is one of the most inflammatory things you can put into your body. And that's really one of the reasons why so many of these studies looking at eating meat and cardiovascular disease, et cetera, are so ridiculous. You know, are they eating grass-fed beef or are they eating non-grass-fed beef? They're completely different types of food to put into your system, and will either be anti-inflammatory or highly inflammatory, right? You really need to make that distinction. If they're eating fish, is it farmed fish? Going to have less omega-3 fatty acids. Is it a cold water wild-caught fish? It's going to have very high levels of omega-3 fatty acid. So these are really critical issues. And when people say, well, the grass-fed is just too expensive, I have a very simple answer. Pay twice as much, eat half as much. Yay, look how simple that was. You'll be healthier all around. So one of the really cool things that we have going on for us is that now, over the last few years, testing prices have gone way down. The number of things we can test for doubles every few months, and the prices come down generally every few months. A few of them sneak up a little bit. They've got faster and faster ways to do the tests. They require less human intervention, and they can lower the price. And a case in point is a test called a Cyto, C-Y-T-O, DX. It's about $250, which is not cheap in my world. But if the same things were tested for 5 years ago, it would have been 10 to 20 times that much. And what this test tests for are the inflammatory and the anti-inflammatory cytokines. So these are the chemicals that are released for a variety of reasons from different cells, and they either lower inflammation or increase inflammation. And most of them will do both. For example, interleukin-6, which is my current favorite, at low levels will help control illness. At higher levels will cause massive inflammation and pain. So one of the things with the CytoDX is we can test and see exactly which cytokines are elevated and causing the problems here. We had a patient that her doctor wanted to put her on a TNF-alpha blocker. We tested. She didn't have a problem with TNF-alpha. She had a problem with IL-6. And we see this kind of thing all the time, where once you identify it, you're got a huge leg up. because there's now been so much research that I can go to a database and find out these specific herbs and supplements that will treat and lower that particular cytokine. Like in my case, I discovered that most of the pain from my arthritis, I have really bad gouty arthritis in my feet, and I've got some arthritis in my wrists, is mediated by interleukin 6. Okay, and there are medications that will help with that. But I also have several supplements that I use to help control my interleukin 6 levels. Fish oil lowers interleukin 6 levels. CoQ10 at high dose lowers IL-6 levels. Lithium orotate at low levels controls and mediates interleukin 6. And there's a whole list. And most of the supplements that you know of as being anti-inflammatory will lower interleukin 6. And again, it's one of the big players. But could be interleukin 8. We ran into an interleukin 13 a while back, and interleukin 4. So it's just nice to know because it allows you to pinpoint immediately where you want to go. Or it could be on the other side. There's some of the interleukins that are anti-inflammatory, and you may not have enough of those, and then we'd want to stimulate those. So these go together like a hand in a glove. Looking at the Chinese aspects of doing pulses, looking at your tongue, identifying where the heat is by the, where it is in your body and by the symptoms. And then we can bring in the cyto testing to further fine tune it and then treat it with acupuncture and Chinese herbs that treat that particular problem. So I'm going to talk about I got a few minutes here, a few things to actually answer Aaron's question now that I went off. So other things that you can use. There was a study a few years ago showing that the 26 most commonly used spice, 26 of 28 of the most commonly used spices in the kitchen have anti-inflammatory properties. Most of them have lots of other properties too. So, anything you can think of, sage, ginger, rosemary, coriander, cilantro, we use all of those in one way or another in our herbal work. So they're all beneficial. So spice things up. Now, I don't mean really, like hot Mexican spices. You can have those too if your gut will handle it. But I'm talking about all these other things that are so readily available and so easy to use. I'm going to start with our old friend ginger. We recommend a lot of ginger. It's so phenomenal as an anti-nausea. We have ginger chews, which are a little sweeter than we would like for most people. But for my pregnant patients that have morning sickness, there are two different types of morning sickness in Chinese medicine. One of them is very, very severe and serious, hyperemesis gravidum. And that one requires a lot of treatment, a lot of acupuncture, and a lot of herbs. But for the simpler form, generally ginger's enough, right? It just handles it. So most of you are familiar with ginger. It's used for, again, arthritis, high blood pressure, etc. And so this is where I looked up some numbers for you. And according to the person that wrote that article, it has over 100 active compounds. Gingerol is the one that I know the best, but zingerone is another one. There's several, but over 100 of them. And those each have different health effects, but they reduce inflammation. There were 16 studies with over 1,000 participants, and they found that taking 1,000 to 3,000 milligrams of ginger daily, that's not an awful lot. That's about half of one of the small capsules, a third to half, sorry, of a small capsule. Taking that for up to 12 weeks reduced tons of different inflammation markers compared to placebo. But the biggies that it reduced were C-reactive protein, which is an indication of overall inflammation. It also, they didn't put it in this article, but it reduces C-reactive protein that's high sensitivity, which is specifically inflammation in the heart and the arteries. Also reduced tumor necrosis factor alpha. So a lot of the drugs that you see that are out there for different inflammatory conditions, ulcerative colitis, Crohn's disease, etc., many of those are anti-tumor necrosis factor alpha. You know, little ginger can go a long way. We've seen it used very effectively for arthritic degeneration of the knee, etc. Next one I'm going to talk about is garlic. So it's the allium family. There are many alliums, but garlic is just one of the most fabulous. Now, there are many different types of garlic. There's something called bear garlic that is one of the most effective things for certain conditions, but it's really specific. And if you need it, you don't want to just take it. It's very hard to find. But typical garlic, Allium sativum, is very popular, very strong. It has a lot of anti-inflammatory compounds. The best known is probably allicin, A-L-L-I-C-I-N. And again, in people that use that over several weeks, and again, there were 17 high-quality studies for this, significantly reduced again, C-reactive protein. So again, you got two of those. Now, aged black garlic is almost magical. It's hard to find, it's more expensive, has even further anti-inflammatory properties, but also removes soft plaque from the arteries. So anyone that has a cholesterol, quote, problem, you might want to consider the black aged garlic. And so this regulated inflammation by affecting interleukin 10 and with nuclear factor NFKB, which is becoming very popular in the news. Check out NFKB. It's really simple, it's easy, it's tasty. I would go with it. I talked a little bit about curcumin and turmeric. It is actually also an NFKB modulator. There were 15 high-quality studies, I'm quoting here, that took up to 4,000 milligrams of curcumin daily. That's typically 500 milligrams is a typical large capsule. So not a huge amount. And in this study, found that it significantly reduced inflammatory markers over placebo. And this one reduced interleukin 6. And again, as I mentioned, I'm running into interleukin 6 everywhere I look. Also high sensitivity C-reactive protein and several other problems. So this is really powerful. And this was done on curcumin, not even the whole turmeric, which I think is a little better. And again, osteoarthritis seems to be about as effective as ibuprofen, diclofenac, things like that. Although I find you have to use it a little bit longer because it has to kind of get up to speed. If you add black pepper to it, is a very common combination. It contains piperine, which increases the curcumin absorption by up to 2,000%. And you'll see a lot of the curcumin products coming out now with black pepper or piperine in it. Cardamom, good old cardamom. Again, reduces C-reactive protein, interleukin 6, TNF-alpha, and several other things. And it also, cardamom raised antioxidant status in these studies by 90%. In people taking cardamom and having prediabetes, found that 3 grams of cardamom, now that's a pretty high dose, daily, significantly reduced all of their inflammatory markers, basically. Black pepper, I mentioned, the piperine. Ginseng, be careful with. It is an anti-inflammatory in most people, but in some people, it's too heating and it will cause the internal problems to come to the surface. It can be acne, it can be high blood pressure, etc. So I don't recommend taking ginseng on your own. You could take American ginseng, which isn't a true ginseng, but you could take that because it doesn't cause as much heat in the body and it's more relaxing. But ginseng is one of the most studied compounds on the planet. Again, it significantly reduces C-reactive protein levels, a primary marker for inflammation, and it also reduced IL-6 and TNF-alpha. So very powerful. One of my all-time favorites. I think this one may have saved my life, actually. When I went to the Chinese doctor to have my back fixed, and I was supposed to have surgery. I didn't end up having the surgery. I am 72 years old. I have no back pain. I guarantee if I had that surgery, I'd have a lot of back pain. But he did quite a few things about changing my lifestyle. And the biggest thing he did was get me to start drinking green tea. And green tea is so powerful. I've got pages of references to studies on the benefits of green tea. One that you don't see as much, but is really way up on the list, is it is the most powerful substance that I'm aware of to maintain the liquid content in the gel-like substance in the eye, the vitreous humor. So it actually maintains a higher level of moisture. That higher level of moisture makes it softer, so you don't form as many floaters. And it also is then, because it's not shrinking and pulling on the retina, you get fewer retina problems. It's also good to help prevent cataracts. The most potent part of the green tea plant is epigallocatechin galates. So the catechins are a family of very powerful phenolic substances, but the most important seems to be the EGCG, the epigallocatechin 3 galate. It's very powerful to reduce inflammation, lowers the rate of mouth and stomach cancers, helps people lose weight. It's been shown to be very powerful with inflammatory bowel diseases. Huge in the studies, and I'm not going to name all the studies right now because it's getting kind of late. Those green tea polyphenols were showed in the studies to be very beneficial for osteoarthritis, rheumatoid arthritis, Alzheimer's disease, gum disease, and several different cancers. So add a little green tea. You can keep doing the other stuff you're doing. Coffee has tremendous health benefits in most people. Black tea has tremendous health benefits in most people, but green tea is right at the top. One of the anti-inflammatory herbs that's becoming more and more used is rosemary. Good old rosemary, right? And there are very high polyphenol content. Rosmarinic acid is often extracted out, but I would say just do straight rosemary. Big improvement in pain and stiffness, and increased mobility in the knees after 16 weeks of doing rosemary. It's also good for atopic dermatitis, and pretty much any inflammatory disease. Cinnamon. Cinnamon's a little bit of a two-edged sword. We have 3 different types of cinnamon that we use. There are 2 main types that you can buy if you're out and about. There's a Ceylon cinnamon, which is often called true cinnamon, and then there's cassia cinnamon, which is the most commonly available. Interestingly enough, 12 studies here that I'm looking at, 4,000 milligrams of cinnamon daily for 100 days significantly reduced C-reactive protein and raised the body's antioxidant levels. And the cassia cinnamon which is cheaper and easier to find, reduced more inflammation than the other form. So cool. Often used for fatty liver, for type 2 diabetes, rheumatoid arthritis. So again, when we talk about inflammation, there's so many different types and so many different locations and so many causes. And that's what has to be really parsed out. Now, cinnamon can be damaging because it has high levels of coumarin. That's not coumadin, but coumarin. So when doctors say, don't drink grapefruit juice with this medication, it's because grapefruit juice has high levels of coumarin in it. And so it can be a problem if you consume more than a teaspoon of cinnamon a day. And I know people, because it came out with the blood sugar lowering properties, they were putting huge amounts of cinnamon. Don't. A little bit's all you need. Okay, so those are the 9 that they had listed, and plus the ones I had listed. The next question was, Is there a formula that you would recommend? There are a couple hundred that I might recommend, but I would really need to have more information. Some work on the liver, some work on the gallbladder, some work on the stomach, some work on the intestines, small, large intestine, some are systemic. And so really would need to know more about type and location before I could really suggest have a recommendation for an herbal formula. That's getting into a whole different level of complexity, and I would be happy to do that. If you want to, amplify the question, I would be happy to go into it next week or the week after. Catherine, any more questions? A lot of questions. Okay.
I was hoping you might discuss gout a bit today as we follow up with your recent email.
I think I'm going to do the entire show next week on uric acid, and that includes gout. It's interesting. Catherine and I did our 6th edit on our book yesterday, finished it. Yeah. And that was a big topic, uric acid. And so in reviewing, going through all the research studies to make sure we had everything accurate, I was once again impressed by the dangers of high levels of uric acid that doctors never talk about. It is implicated in high blood pressure, cardiovascular disease, stroke, etc. And that's levels that are within what's considered normal on a Western medical test. So the ranges that you'll see on those tests are way too high to maintain good health in terms of uric acid. On the other end, low uric acid is also a danger for a different reason. So I'm going to talk about that next week. I think you should all tune in, whether you think you have a uric acid problem or not, because uric acid is one of those silent killers. Nobody knows they have high uric acid until they have a gout or some condition or a near death.
Okay. Is there a difference between good antibodies and those antibodies that indicate we still have a disease?
Well, they're all good. Antibodies are what fight antigens. So when you get something into your body, however it comes in, that wants to attack you, and the most common battleground is in the gut. So you get antigens, they get into your system, and then you form antibodies that mark them so that the cells that kill them can come along and eat them, right? These gigantic white cells. And so they're good for you. The markers staying around are a little problematic because then you can't tell if it's an active infection generally or not. I mean, you can, but it's a little harder. And so they're all good to have. You don't want to have no antibodies. It's that the antibodies, if they're at too high a level, will stimulate the body. It's like the antibodies are the fire truck that gets called out, the first responder. They get there and go, oh, whoa, wait a minute. We need a lot of help. So it's a 3 alarm fire. And so it's your body sends out a bunch of chemicals that attract cells that eat leukocytes, et cetera, that eat these compounds or eat these antigens. And you get this huge response. If it doesn't shut off, then you get an autoimmune response. So it's about keeping them in balance. It's not about getting rid of them. We need them, but we need them to shut off when it's time to shut off.
I like that explanation. Can you talk about the dawn effect?
The dawn effect, about an hour before sunrise, your body will respond, which is amazing. Your body knows it's an hour before sunrise, right? Will respond by releasing more cortisol. Cortisol is what activates your blood sugar system. So you'll release more blood sugars into your bloodstream, which will then wake you up, right? It's like, whoa, I'm awake. That's really from the cortisol causing a dawn effect. Now, where it can be, so it's critical. You want that to happen. In people that are extremely adrenal compromised, they aren't forming enough cortisol. They don't get a dawn effect. In fact, when you look at their cortisol, their 24-hour cortisol measurements, they're flatlining, right? They're starting out with not enough adrenal compounds, particularly cortisol, to even wake them up in the morning. Okay, so it's critical. If you get a hyper dawn effect, then it can wake you up with a start. It's like, kind of catching your breath, like you've been attacked. And also, it can cause then other responses. A lot of times, early morning headaches are caused by an excess cortisol surge along with the dawn effect. Anything else I want to say?
I think that's good.
Okay.
Where can one access such a list of supplements to regulate each cytokine?
What I would recommend is just go online and look up supplements for whichever one it is you want. Interleukin 6, interleukin 8, whatever it is. And now there's some, again, the general ones. Curcumin tends to be very general. Fish oil tends to be very general. Green tea tends to be very general, right? They kind of work for almost everything. But if you plug in interleukin 6 and supplements, you'll get a list that will show up there. And that's really how I formed my lists originally. And then, of course, I'd go in and do more and more research on them just to make sure it was information that was to be trusted. But the great thing is, unless someone's trying to sell you something, there's no benefit for them to lie about it. And 99% of these substances that you'll see as supplements or herbs aren't going to harm you. So that's one of the nice things. Oh, by the way, if you have a condition, right? Rheumatoid arthritis, okay? And they want to give you a drug, or you're taking a drug. Well, you can look up what that drug specifically does. Does it control TNF alpha? Does it control IL-6? Does it control IL-8, et cetera? And then you look up specific supplements for whatever that drug was working on. And I've treated many, many people like that, which used to be very hard. The information was not easy to find. It would take me a tremendous amount of work. Now it's pretty doggone easy.
There are so many green teas. Do you recommend one?
The best studied is Dragonwell. Again, if you can get it organic, we're talking about most of these are coming from areas that tend to be pretty polluted, China, India, et cetera. I find that Dragonwell is the best studied in general, and that has huge health benefits. Matcha green tea is probably the most pure and the safest. Tea pulls up a lot of fluoride, and there's a debate about if it's too much fluoride or not. I'll let you decide that. But matcha tends to be more pure. It's a Japanese tea, the type that you whisk, right? You put it in hot water and then you whisk it up with a brush. That's a lot more fun, actually. So if you have the time, I would go with the matcha. If you don't have a lot of time, I would do the Dragonwell.
Okay. If you have time, what's the best form of rosemary to take for memory and increased alertness? Dose and tincture, oil, or food?
I don't know. That's the basic answer. I have quite a few supplements that have different forms of rosmarinic acid, rosemary, et cetera. But I have not done the research to look at a bunch of different products to see. So I don't really know. I'm finding generally that people, for most supplements, get the best results with tinctures, generally alcohol tinctures. If you don't do alcohol, you can heat it and drive off the alcohol, but you can also get it with glycerin. But I think most of the time, most people do a little bit better with tinctures. They tend to be a little stronger and a little more pure generally.
Okay. Last question. Will decaf green tea give you the same benefits?
No, but it'll give you the epigallocatechin gallate, which is the most important benefit.
Okay. Thank you.
Awesome. Well, at least we came in at under an hour. So I want to thank you all for listening. I love doing these. It's really one of the high points for me. So keep sending those great questions. Thank you. Be happy, be healthy.